Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome everyone to a new Afkari episode. The Arab Reform Initiative hosts a series of conversations, one on one conversations, sometimes more than just one on one conversations between ARI staff and experts, partners, collaborators, and affiliates of the organization on several topics that we work on. And this episode of Afkari falls under the social protection programs activities and is basically aimed at addressing the current emergency response in Lebanon amid the war happening now between Hezbollah and Israel in the south, in the Dahieh, and also more broadly in Lebanon and in different parts of Beirut. The emergency response is the second of its kind in a short period of time, in a 2 year time. This is the second war we're having of this sort, and the emergency response has been very intense. We've been doing well at so many things, and we've been doing somewhat bad on other things that we are here to discuss and to assess and to see what is it that can be done to improve the response and what infrastructure can we be relying on and what is it in terms of mechanisms that we should be introducing for the response to become more effective and to be a bit more forward looking. Today's discussion is basically mainly to speak about the role of civil society organizations in holding the state accountable amid the emergency response. And while we're speaking about that, we will be saying what the state is doing well and what the state is not doing well. But this is not the center of the discussion. The center of the discussion is how can we, as civil society organizations, especially the knowledge producing civil society organization, and also other service providing civil society organization, how can we intervene in the emergency response in a way that is most beneficial? What role can we really have, but especially what role do we have in holding the state accountable? Because as you all know, the state is responsible for this emergency response and should be the first and in an ideal world only responsible for this emergency response in terms of responsibility, speaking responsibility wise. So how can we hold them accountable? What are the mechanisms that we can use that are available? How can we improve them, and what other mechanisms do we need, and how can we introduce these mechanisms? While discussing our role in accountability, while assessing what the state is currently doing, we will be thinking of so many other aspects together. And we have with us today Ms. Cynthia Saghir, who's an independent expert in social policy with a focus on Lebanon affairs. And she's been working with so many key actors in humanitarian assistance and social assistance in the country, with the cash working group, with the basic assistance working group, with our colleagues at Oxfam and at the Chameleon Consortium. And she's been involved in so many discussions, research, and advocacy efforts to promote a better social protection system, one that is inclusive, that is more sustainable, that is more integrated, less fragmented, and that is more effective or adequate at indeed providing social protection to those in need, whether during humanitarian situations or in general. Cynthia, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be hosting you today. And I think this is a very timely discussion, and having you and your insights and the data that you have, and also like the hands-on experience that you have being involved with the different actors on the ground, the frontliners. It's very interesting to have you and to discuss these issues with you, because we tend to be taken by the what's happening, the political events, that we forget the social element, and that we basically forget how important it is to be still thoughtful about social services and social protection amid a humanitarian emergency, when this emergency is stemming from a political factor and from political dynamics. Welcome
Thank
once
you. Thank
again.
you, Farah. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you. Yes.
The pleasure is all ours, my dear. And I think we can get started. I mean, and think of any progress or actually regression that we've made, that we've witnessed recently since the war started. It's been more than a month ago. I mean, before the war, we had made so many gains when it comes to the social protection program in Lebanon. We started to advance some laws, implement some others, some improvements or like progress in implementation were quite shy. I know, but we also, and we saw indeed some gains. We were somewhat trying to move or starting to move from programs to system building, and then the war started and it all went backwards. And then even the money that was supposed to go for system building basically got reallocated for the humanitarian response, the prioritization of interventions, and so on and so forth. If I am, before we start speaking accountability and role of different actors, including non-state and non-intrastate actors, what is it that we're doing well and what is it that we're not doing well in terms of the emergency response now in Lebanon, Cynthia?
So I think that there have definitely been a lot of better activities and more responses, especially in improving how coordination works between the DRM and the various actors. And the fact that there were a lot, the fact that the fact that there were a lot of collective shelters that were open to a lot of people. This was not as available as before. There was more, but of course, it's never enough. You always, like, a lot of people have been left on the street, as we know, and it's been horrible. Some people have started to return during the ceasefire period, but we don't know when it's going to break out again. But at the same time, I think the DRM is doing a better job this time around than it did not the last time around. It's not a thing, but we are still in the process of system building, and the DRM is doing better this time around. Because there's more preparedness. And when I mean DRM, I mean Disaster Risk Management Unit, that functions under the presidency of the Council of Ministers, and they're doing a lot of really great stuff to coordinate between the different actors. However, whenever I think about disaster risk management and the way in which this happens, and who are the first responders, it's always civil society organizations on the ground that immediately respond to the people's needs because they're in direct proximity with them. They're able to completely, just allow people to meet their needs through various ways and help them move during times of crisis and during times of war, of course. Like, you have a lot of civil society organizations that have been functioning in Lebanon since the 80s. Hamil Association is one of them. They've done great work with older persons, with vulnerable groups, with everybody. And this is a local organization, obviously, and you have much larger organizations. But the problem is that, to my knowledge, there is no national framework to include civil society organizations in the response and in coordinating the response. So a lot of the times it's very ad hoc, and there's a lot of things that are done on the spot and stuff like that. So there's kind of this lack of coordination and just the national framework. Of course, the state is meant to provide services, and this has been improved, of course, especially with the transfer of cash assistance through the mechanisms of the government with the support of WFP and also finance with the British government. But at the same time, there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of need to include civil society organizations in decision making and developing a framework. When I was still at Chameleon, we had recently partnered with the Asfari Institute of Civil Society at the American University of Beirut, and we were working on a study together about the role of civil society organizations in the response. And we found that a lot of the times there was a lot of blurred lines in terms of what should be coordinated and who you knew at any place, the municipality, like the DRM, a bunch of different things. So it's very ad hoc. So while we have improved and while there have been more, there's been more of a responsiveness and relatively an adequacy in the delivery of response, there still needs to be a comprehensive framework, especially because of the fact that civil society organizations are also used by different organizations, like, for example, much smaller organizations like Oxfam or NRC, to reach people on the ground because they help them. By partnering with a local organization, you have kind of trust building, and the fact that they have such an important role, yet they do not have decision-making power, is a huge problem. Because the fact that, like, they need to have the necessary structure to be able to conduct their activities in a more effective manner, in a more coordinated manner, to fill in the gaps of people who are not whose needs are not addressed. So yeah, you're on mute, Farah.
Oh yeah, I was muted. Thank you, Cynthia. And this is a very good start, actually, and very insightful, a very insightful introduction from your part. I have to say, because indeed, I mean, as I said before, we were moving from scattered and sporadic interventions to system building, and then we went backwards again. So we were basically just starting to think about integration, and now the focus is again on outcome because you need to respond to people's to meet ends meet, to respond to people's needs, and that is really bad. And I think that part of why this is the case is, as you said, I mean, lack of coordination. Indeed, I mean, we could not foresee the first war, although in my opinion we should have foreseen it. And but let's assume that we couldn't foresee it. How about the second war? Why weren't we prepared? Why do we have so many leverage points? Why do we have so many basically tools and legal tools, or like, for example, the National Social Protection Strategy, the pension law 319, the NDA that we wanted to expand, the other social grants for the elderly, for children, that we also wanted to introduce. So even social security reforms that we were thinking about in terms of social insurance and the governance and technical reforms to the national social security funds. All these, we didn't do them before the war. So when the war started, all the people had was just the humanitarian response. You see, so it was again only humanitarian assistance. So that is one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that humanitarian assistance hasn't also been coordinated, because what we need is for coordination to happen between the humanitarian actors, and then so within the humanitarian assistance community, and then between them and the state, between humanitarian assistance and social assistance. But at the same time, because we were not prepared, we didn't have the National Social Assistance Committee and the different development agencies set already in place. We didn't have the interministerial committee that is chaired by MOSA, that has a technical secretariat that we've been asking for. So the coordination is still very, I'm not going to say mediocre, but not sufficient. So we don't have enough coordination. So when we don't have enough coordination, and as you said, it's mostly civil society organizations that are stepping in different hats, particularly the service providing civil society organization, the interventionists, the humanitarianists on the ground. So it's mainly those non-state and trans-state actors on the ground, supported by the state instead of the opposite,
Mm-hmm.
you see? Or it's not basically in terms of who supports what, in terms of who is predominating the scene, or who has the biggest stake in the response. Then you see that non-state and trans-state actors are those that have the biggest stake, especially if we are to take into consideration the financing question. The emergency response is, if not fully, in large part financed by international actors, the WFP, other UN agencies, INGOs, the World Bank through the safety net. So, and the shock responsive social safety net, we know it's WFP. So that's why we're seeing that the response is maybe better than before, especially the DRMs part of it, but it's not the response we we're expecting and that we were supposed to have. Because also, this whole response, despite all the basically critical elements that I just enumerated, is coming to a poor baseline to social protection, because we didn't do the reforms that were about to see the light. We still don't have social security set in place with humanitarian assistance as complementary. We are mainly now, amid the emergency, relying on humanitarian assistance. And I saw you nodding, Cynthia, so I'm so happy that we're basically aligned on the reading of the situation. Because it does seem that this is, yes, the status quo, and we need to change it. So if we are to change that, what role do you think civil society organizations should have? And this involves the humanitarian interventionist to begin with. It involves the knowledge producing civil society, like, for example, the Arab Reform Initiative. So what role do we have in the emergency response, including when it comes to holding the state accountable? So knowing that the state is the one that should be held accountable, civil society organizations can do more by choice and have a responsibility, but it's not a binding responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But what role do they have, and how can they hold the state accountable given the mechanisms that already exist? Over.
Yeah. I think first I would like to say first that I think that the government does have a stake in all of this, in the emergency response, especially because of, I'll give credit where credit is due. Where I think Moza is doing a great job within the limited capacity that it has. It's been doing a good job, in my opinion. Again, given the, but I think that sometimes the minute, like, I think the reason why they have a stake is because of the fact that there's a lot of pressure being set on Moza, or there's a lot of, I mean, Moza's trying to step up as much as it can. I would not like to use this word, but I will use this word to monopolize kind of the response. A lot of the money goes through Moza. A lot of the management goes through Moza. A lot of stuff happens through Moza, and there's a lot of, like, the social dynamic, the social policy aspect goes through Moza. So I definitely think that they do have a stake in it to maintain kind of like the role, especially as it moves from the Ministry of Social Affairs to the Ministry of Social Development in terms of rebranding or in terms of changing the name. So I think that it is trying to step up in its way, but I think that there's a lot of the times when they do not, when they could use a lot more help from experts. And I think this is necessary to take into account rather than doing things their own kind of way. And I can observe this in several aspects, especially in the cash response. I won't go into the details because I don't want to get in trouble, as I usually do, unfortunately. And so so anyway, but I won't go further than that. But I think that Moses is doing a good job, and they do have a major stake given the major role that they're being given by donors, by different organizations. And I think that some organizations are trying to move forward in a trying to do it in good faith, trying to work with Moza in good faith. Now regarding the role of civil society organizations in holding the state accountable, I think that there is kind of a gap in the mechanisms that you know civil society organizations can hold. Like, when okay, so there, in my opinion, civil society organizations range in different kinds of roles. For example, ADI has the role of developing policy papers or doing studies and doing reflections and seeing how what policies can be developed to have a better response, right? So this is a very important role that these kind of networks and organizations have, especially, speaking of ADI, especially. And in terms of on the ground, I think that there should be kind of, I mean, and one of the recommendations that came out of the study that we did with Chameleon is that basically civil society organizations should organize themselves as well. I mean, nothing happens without organizing. Like, why do we have a weekend, for example? There are workers who went out. It's not the same, obviously, but people did protest and people did organize to be able to get to where we are, including, for example, the formation of the NDA. The only reason why the NDA happened, despite everything, is because of the fact that you had a bunch of civil society organizations coming together. You had, OPDs, you had UNICEF, you had ILO, and then the government all together. Now, this is to a lot of people in the social protection field in Lebanon specifically. It's like they say that the National Disability Allowance and finding the foundation of the National Disability Allowance is a huge win for universal rights-based social protection. But again, this couldn't have happened had it not been for like a general consolidation of efforts of of everything, really. So I think that there's a lot of things. I think first of all, there's the research aspect and the policy aspect and constantly talking to different actors, but also there's the aspect of organizing amongst ourselves and organizing, like, for civil society organizations to organize and push the government to establish a framework. And there is a committee apparently in the ministry, in the presidency of the Council of Ministers, for the disaster risk management response, obviously, but at the same time, it is not as inclusive of civil society organizations. So I think that there's a general need for civil society to band together and to have this, because I mean, the what's happening now in this ad hoc response and the huge role of like non-state actors in the response is not new. This has been something since the 90s, since the Civil War, since after the Ta'if. It's the same story. Now there have been advancements, as you've been saying. There's a lot of advancements. They're even trying to finance the Aman program through the government's budget, and also a lot of money has been allocated to the National Disability Allowance. This is huge, by the way. Like, the fact that they're allocating money to these social programs is super important, and it's one of the many steps forward that we need to undertake. But at the same time, we need to understand that organizing and having more transparency and like understanding how these governance mechanisms and these frameworks work are super important to advancing any kind of, like, universal rights based or like, inclusive stuff. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you for saying all that you said, Cynthia. Indeed, POSA is spread very thin given its capacity. Now, does it make it less responsible? I don't think so. But I totally see your point. I totally see your point, Cynthia, because I mean, if we are to look on the negative side, there are people who are still excluded. The top ups, the transfer values are still not enough to basically protect the people in need. The data sharing system is still poor, even not really piggybacking well enough on the rights and assistance program, the NDA, and we're not like still unifying. We don't have yet a unified registry to the extent we need, but also basically, in my opinion, we're still using the social registry, which takes 2 years to be updated. So this is its timeline. So this is also one caveat, and that's why so many people are still excluded. But at the same time, as you said, given the capacity it has and given the scope of the crisis, I think yes, it's been doing a lot of basically advancements at improving the response and covering more people and basically responding to people's needs. The number of shelters is still not like adequate. It's still not enough, but also we've been seeing them doing their best. Now, I wouldn't like link this to their strategy to like turn the Ministry of Social Affairs into a Ministry of Social Development, because in my opinion, I mean, looking at the strategy and how they're implementing things on the ground, I don't really see that it's a rightful attempt to be moving from assistance to the from social affairs to development. Why is it so? Because as you said, all we're doing is aman. First of all we're doing now, as you can see, when it comes to the emergency response itself, what we're doing is exclusively funding it through international external money, through debt, and it's all debt, and we're taking that from the World Bank. And now we've got like this $200 million approved, and we're thinking of the $1 billion that was requested back in spring 2025. It had 200 million also for the social safety net, and now it's being reconsidered to be channeled, and it's all for Aman. Even when it comes to the public budget, yes, I do have some numbers here from the 2026 budget. We have some allocations from the public budget for Mosa, and this is going for Aman, which in my opinion is making things worse, because before we used to call out poverty targeted as an approach, and part of why we were calling this out is because it's funded by external financial resources, among other reasons, that it's not it's poverty targeted, it's not universal, not rights based. Now this not rights based approach is also funded by the public budget. So the $51 million that is going to Mosa, $31 million are going to health services, and $21 million to education. But the $51 million that is going to Mosa on social protection, we're putting this in Aman instead of, as we said at the beginning, putting this into social grants and into social insurance and other stuff. We're focusing on Aman, we're focusing on social services because this is the easy way and the high visibility way, basically, and the active labor market programs. Now, what happened is that we're using the social registry to basically host or to run and reproduce the social safety net. So instead of unifying registries, we come now to the shock responsive safety net. So we're using the social registry for other things, for the shock responsive safety net and other things, which is making the vertical expansion possible, but the horizontal expansion not possible. So there are things to praise, things not to that basically we are still far from achieving, and it's not people's mistake if we have a strategy to change names or to do whatever. If the government is basically not fully responding, it's not their mistake. I don't think we should ever basically I don't think we should ever justify to the government. It is a responsibility position that they have, and I don't think they have been meeting it well enough given the circumstances and that they needed to be prepared. On accountability, I don't know if you want to say something about this, because I know that we don't have to agree. You were much kinder when it comes to your assessment of the government's role, so you don't have to agree with me. I don't know if you have something to say about this, but I want us, once you're done reacting, I want us to also speak about the role of civil society again in accountability. Go ahead.
So I love how every time there's a conversation about social protection, specifically in the region, we always talk about the poverty targeting approach, like the proxy means testing, versus more universal rights based. And it always goes back to that, especially when you're talking to more progressive people, such like I'd like to think we're more progressive, because so I have a friend called, and he's also a very big academic. His name is Philip Proudfoot. I think you might know him. Anyway, so Philip said something to me once that I really resonated with me, and it's the fact that, first of all, in Lebanon and in global South countries, we call like any kind of social policy like towards people, we always call it social protection. But in the global north, or in the global minority, or whatever we choose to call it, they call it social welfare because they don't use poverty targeting mechanisms. They don't use it. And the reason why we say that we want to use poverty targeting mechanisms is because a lot of people say they're cheaper. But again, as you were saying, it takes 2 years to readjust the social registry or to update. But the thing is, they do it every year, and this is costly because of the fact that you have to send out social workers. I'm sure we've had this discussion before, Farah, but it is expensive. It's not cheap, yani. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind whenever we talk about PMT and the benefits of having PMT. And I don't like when they call rights-based categorical, because it's not categorical. Categorical is just adding weights to the proxy means formula. Like, you have a disabled person, that's a category, and they put more weights on that. So I think this is really important to make a distinction between rights-based and
So we agree.
of course we do.
So we agree.
Absolutely. No, especially about the proxy means. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that the government is doing what it can within the framework, as you're saying, like in terms of like they're using a bit of the social registry to target people. This is what they did in the first shock responsive social safety net. Now it's being updated with the online website. But at the same time, like when it comes to accountability, for example, now we can move on to the question of users and accountability. Basically, the problem with this, I mean, there's a huge thing when it comes to opaqueness and clarity and misunderstanding of how people can access these programs, because we conducted like with Chameleon, we conducted like 5 studies on users, like their understanding of how social protection or humanitarian CVA programs work. Like, but the thing is, there's a lot of things that remain unclear, no matter how many, like transparency sort of mechanisms they introduce. That whenever you have proxy means or targeted kind of things, people are always going to struggle to understand more about this program. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's really important to have universal rights based, but also to have accountability means to be able to understand people and to understand the adequacy of these programs as well, and to see whether or not they're being able to respond to the needs and seeing what people's grievances are. And this is something that I remember you want to speak about, which is grievance and redress mechanisms, which are also very, very, very important. And the thing is, I mean, Khalil Daghir, for example, really praises the need for GRM. Khalil from UNICEF. He always talks about GRM and the necessity for it, and how important it is, because that's how you can understand more about users and about how they perceive these programs. But unfortunately, this comes after you already give the program. They, like, a lot of people don't have a direct input into the way programs are designed. But to give everybody assistance, even though they say they don't have the budget for it, is extremely important. Especially when you have, like they say, PMT is not like we're using it because it's cost effective. I don't think that's true. We need a quantitative assessment, a more updated one than the ILO did before, the one with they conducted in like 2020 or something, the one about the social protection, towards the social protection floor. But I think it's really important to have these conversations about what kind of programs and accountability, because at the end of the day, what's the point of social policy if not to allow people to meet their needs and to allow them, like, to support them. I think it's really important. Like, I don't know, it kind of baffles me that we're still having these conversations a little bit. Not that I don't love having these conversations, but yeah.
I mean, sometimes we also are blamed or accused to be saying the same thing. But yes, we keep saying sometimes the same things because no one listens, and because in the previous war we wrote policy brief and we had very clear asks, but these have not been acted on. And we understand that there are limitations, but we haven't been acting on so many things that sometimes it's a bit hard to justify. But as you said, as the knowledge produce, as the basically first the service providing civil society, and this is when I keep saying non-state and trans-state actors that do humanitarian interventions. So they are there to support, to step in. Instead of doing this, they are being predominantly the ones acting. But yes, Musa has really improved in predominating the scene recently. We have to give them credit for sure. And And but at the same time, I mean, the presence of these humanitarian actors and the fact that they're not coordinating amongst each other and representing themselves in front of the government and then coordinating with the government, and that even as you mentioned before, even governmental agencies aren't coordinating well enough amongst each other when speaking about DRM, MOSA, different ministries. I mean, we're seeing we're seeing them not very basically not coordinating well enough. So what I'm trying to say is that non-state actors have a role. It should be complementary. It's not yet on the complementary side. It's still a main role, and this is making the government assume its responsibility less, while it's basically providing anesthetic treatment to the people who are basically demanding less of their rights and less of basically the better system that we want, because they think that they're receiving this like cash injection, and that they think that this is all they can or should get when it comes to social protection.
Mhm.
But now speaking, and this is on the service providing side, and it also has to do with the trust. I mean, people don't really trust the government. Now, maybe with MOSA improving its response, the trust will be built, but not as much. You see, it's like we still need more to be able to build this. This mutual trust or this trust from the citizens to the state, and then the social contract could be better tied and better shaped. Now, when it comes to the knowledge producing civil society, to us, as you said, we need to be documenting things, documenting the numbers. We need to be analyzing, and in policy briefs and different advocacy tools, we need to be basically advocating for I mean, for the improvement of any response or any policy. So this is one role that we do. Now, when it comes to accountability, we also, as part of advocating, we also have a role, I think, in transmitting people's voices. So the GRMs, I fully agree with Khalil as to why this is important. I hear you. The GRMs happen to be a step after the fait accompli. So it's like you have the GRM, but the response is already de facto. So I fully understand what you mean. But at the same time, they're important because it's a mechanism or a channel through which people can voice out and through which people uh, can basically raise their grievances and their demand to the state. Now, I know for a fact that we have a very successful experience with the NDA's GRM, but we didn't build on this experience. On the other side, to be also positive, MOSA has developed a grievance redress mechanism. The call center is very now developed. It's receiving calls. Now we need to interact with people more to test the grounds with them and to see to what extent is it that MOSA is responding to the calls, is acting on the calls, etc. I know that the DRM also has a grievance redressal mechanism. So this takes us to another point, which is the joint monitoring and joint GRM mechanism. We still don't have it. We still didn't establish it, despite we could have done so before the war, building on the successful experience of the NDA. We should have integrated all GRMs. Now, this is a GRM that we have. Maybe we need to evaluate it. We need to assess it. You will tell me how well is it doing, because I mean, you speak to the people more and you speak to researchers who do field work and speak to people more. Does civil society have also a role at the GRM? Do we need, for example, a GRM between us and the people, but we are a third party? We're not the provider, we're not the beneficiary. So can we host a GRM? Does this make sense? Or alternatively, can we say, as part of the civil society's role in advocating with the state, can we ask for a GRM to be hosted by the state for us as CSOs to be transmitting people's voice? So it's like an indirect or second-hand GRM, and maybe you have more avant-gardist basically solutions to propose. So over to you. Like, I really want to hear what you have in mind when it comes to this.
What I will say about GRMs and the role of civil society organizations, I think it's really important because I mean, even as I mean, a lot of civil society organizations are providers of a lot of services. So, I mean, GRMs, of course, as we were saying, while it does not directly feed into the program, it does kind of, because you know how to, you would be able to tweak some aspects of a program, like any program. But at the same time, when you have much larger scale programs, I feel like it's difficult to track what everybody is saying. I mean, there are a couple of people who I spoke to. I won't go into details, but basically, I won't go into details as to who spoke to me, but who I spoke to. But basically, they were telling me that like the majority of the time there wasn't a lot of clarity on the delivery of assistance. There wasn't a lot of clarity. Even there's a person with disabilities who I spoke to as well, who was telling me, like, a lot of the times when there were top-ups on the NDA or something like that, they would tell, like, the redress mechanism of a certain program differed from the general one. And this actually, among users, this actually creates a lot of confusion among users in general, because of the fact that they, a lot of the times, because there'd be so many redress mechanisms, they don't know which one to contact. Even though they get a message or something, there's still a lack of clarity. Like, no matter what they do, there's always going to be a lack of clarity on what happens. And this is something that I think we should just come to terms with, because there's literally nothing you can do. So many millions have been placed into having more transparency in programs and stuff like that, and having better better GRM. And actually, I did visit the call center of Moza, and I found it very impressive. But at the same time, I don't think we necessarily have to have a unified GRM, only because of the fact that some people, like, unless you want to have extremely trained people to speak to certain people, there are different ways you reach out to different people. I think it's really important to consider users themselves, rather than, I mean, for example, a person with disability who's, let's just say, deaf, can't pick up the phone and answer. And this actually happened once. A call, like, they were doing top ups for people with disabilities, and somebody was next to a person who wasn't deaf, and he's like, somebody's calling me, I think it's the ministry, like, he's signing to this person. This person picks up the phone, and it's just like, the person on the phone goes like, do you have proof of that the person is next to you? She's like, I can't do that because he's deaf. It's like, but then they invented the video call, which is also very important. There are a lot of improvements that are made, but I think it's really important, even if you do have a unified one, even if you do have a unified communication strategy, but people should know that there are messages, like, each user has a different way of being approached, or for a grievance redress mechanism, or for programs in general. Like, an older person needs face-to-face interaction, and a person with disabilities needs somebody that's able to sign. So these are all really, 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 really important things, and I think civil society definitely has a role in this. But again, I think there's a lack of clarity in data, because a lot of the grievance redress mechanisms, all this data as to what the concerns are not made public. So it makes it extremely important for, even if a civil society organization doesn't do their own GRM, I mean, it's really difficult to get the data and deduplicate it from the ministry to be able to then do the grievance redress mechanisms.
But
And same thing with
Cynthia,
humanitarian.
Cynthia,
Yeah.
this is
What?
yeah, sorry to be
Yeah.
interrupting, but this is the second reason as to why we think joining the different
Yeah.
GRMs would be beneficial.
Yeah.
Because the first reason you mentioned it,
Mm.
you were saying people don't know who to talk
Yeah.
to and
Exactly.
which basically platform to. So had there been only one
Hmm.
GRM, then it's just like this one, and they don't have to do the GRM's GRM and then the ministry's GRM, and then to get confused. And the second thing is is consolidated
Yeah.
data, and then we can think about data sharing.
100%.
But it's
Yeah.
very hard to ask for data sharing
Hmm.
when it's not just like compiled, or it's not unified. For me, I'm always for a joint monitoring and evaluation, a joint follow-up and review, a joint GRM. I'm always for unifying. Maybe I'm not right, and but because it's always challenging to be implementing things. So if we just do one thing, then or if we unify every mechanism, every platform, then it makes it easier when it comes to execution or to implementation. But I don't necessarily have to be right. And I really thank you for your point on data sharing. Alternatively, if the government will stay reluctant on sharing data with civil society, so that we can assess, analyze, and advise, and with other policy institutions, maybe international organizations that provide policy advice and how to like improve and do policy reforms. If they're reluctant on sharing for data privacy reasons or whatever, maybe at least we can, as you said, create our own GRM as civil society. But this also make it duplicative, and it's also we're a third party, and we're already struggling to make ourselves heard in front of the government. So how about when we want to make ourselves heard on the input coming from people's GRM? But let's not forget that GRMs also have, as just like any digitalization matter now, I mean, GRMs are digital mostly, because it's a platform where people like submit, and it's basically, yeah, there are the calls. And I remember from an event that you organized, there was this person with
Yeah.
disability,
Yeah.
and they were
Hmm.
basically calling him, and So I also remember that other
Mhm.
instance. So it's a bit of a blind and lack of training and a blind exercise that they're doing. But going back to the discussion, I was saying that yes, GRMs, apart from the calls, whatever is online, will have to be basically become more inclusive in another way. Why is it so? Because not all people have digital
Yep.
literacy,
Agreed.
not all people benefit from digital inclusion.
Completely agree.
Even in remote areas, we even don't have access to electricity, we don't have access to telecommunications infrastructure, and we ask people to submit their grievances online. So calls is a bit more acceptable, but also not the most inclusive form. So maybe we should be speaking about the role of the social development
Mhm.
centers, the local
Mhm.
development centers, which also haven't been as active as needed or as expected during the war, because like I heard, but I'm not sure, that they're not hosting refugees, they're not hosting like receiving
Mhm.
refugees. But we do need, I mean, to think about these mechanisms and to discuss, I think, with the
Mhm.
government how we can better coordinate on all accounts, solve the fragmentation or the lack of coordination among the humanitarian actors, among the governmental actors, between them, and then how we can, in a second step, unify the different mechanisms that exist. And why do we still, by the way, talk just about the GRM? Why don't we ask for our right as civil society organization, which is a participatory process through which we have regular or periodic discussions with the government where they really listen to us, and then we can hold them accountable in the sense of like follow up with them and ask them, we had agreed on this outcome, that outcome, where are you with the implementation, why was this implemented? We don't have that platform for regular discussion. So maybe the GRM is a solution, but maybe just regular meetings on a one-on-one or in person at least would help. What do you
I
think? And
think,
maybe then we can wrap up because we're past the
yeah.
time. Over, Cynthia. Yeah,
No,
yours.
I completely agree with you, which is then goes back to my point about organizing among civil society organizations and having this platform, let's just say. Like, as you're saying, this
Mhm,
platform is like super important. And I think one of the main things is to basically have kind of, لجنة, في لجنة. I think there is a committee again, but I mean, there isn't a main spot or role of civil society organizations. So I think that in order to be
mhm,
able to hold them accountable, it's important to have these kinds of committees and this kind of platform to hold,
mhm,
different people accountable, even humanitarian organizations. I mean, there are so many working groups and so many things. Why is there a gap? Why is there no
mhm,
organization? There are a lot of things that have failed. There's a lot of things that have been dismantled. Like, for example, there was the cash working group in 2016. It was phased out, and then you had the basic systems working group for like almost 10 years. And then you have now the cash working group again. So these kinds of things, I feel like Camino, no, they're not in it. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think organizing among civil society organizations and to voice what exactly we want, what civil society organizations want, and how to move forward, I think is really important. So even developing a strategy is important. Like, you know how they have these like policy papers that are joint and everybody signs. These are also equally
mhm.
important. So I think this would be also very important for people to organize. And then when you like, it's just you can't like we can't sit around and just hope for that the government's going to wake up one day and do whatever. It's really important for people to come together and to band together to be able to do this and establish some kind of governance structure and even the framework in general. What's the role that civil society organizations play on the ground? GRM, can they feed within the system of doing the GRM as a third party? It doesn't necessarily have to be social workers. Social workers can band together with civil society organizations, which they kind of do. They work together to begin with, because there are a lot of referral systems that happen. Like, let's just say I know somebody who's not doing well, I will refer them to a social worker for social development center. So there's a lot of different things, but I mean, it's really important to have these set in stone, to have them on a piece of paper. So this is like, okay,
Mhm.
this is your role, this is my role, because having clarifying all these roles, I think, is extremely important, and holding the government accountable is really important. So yeah, that's over.
Thank you so much, because in this last point you have added a very, very important recommendation, or actually you have added a layer when it comes to the role of the CSOs in holding the state accountable, because it's not only knowledge production, advocacy, convening with them, it's also the community building and mobilization and the campaigning. It's the mobilization, it's this collective action that we that we do through the joint statements, through basically helping people converge on a certain discourse on specific or a single set of policy
Mhm.
recommendations, and then advancing that. So I fully agree with you. I mean, this is something that we've been actually doing, and I don't know how I forgot to mention it. So thank you, Cynthia, for bringing this to our attention. We need basically these joint statements. We need this campaigning, and we need to mobilize the community to be able to create the critical mass that is needed to voice out and to speak. I mean, for the people and for those that are most in need. In terms of I want to end this discussion, but I wanted to add just a couple of things that, and this is coordination, because civil society organizations need to also be coordinated amongst each other, amongst
We need to
themselves,
hold ourselves
before they can
accountable. Exactly.
ex-
Yeah.
as you said. And we're doing a lot of this, but we have to stay conscious that we also have responsibility in doing this and in doing it better, you see. And this is what I mean. I think it was you who said this sometime when we were discussing that it's sometimes more expensive not to be coordinating. So maybe people sometimes think that coordination mechanisms are expensive to be put in place, but maybe it wasn't you. Yeah, but I think you agree
No,
with the
I
statement.
definitely do
But
agree.
maybe
I agree with that.
yeah,
Maybe it was Diana
but
that said it.
even not coordinating, just like social registries are more expensive than any universal social protection scheme, and poverty targets are more expensive, just like creating parallel systems and parallel delivery mechanisms is more expensive. Also, not coordinating makes things more expensive, so we'd rather coordinate.
Mhm,
And also co-financing,
mhm,
we need to be co-financing more. I mean, NDA just in 2 years had a successful experience as well in like moving from exclusive external financing to
go. Mhm,
co-financing. And I think by doing this coordination between the different players, then we can better promote this phasing in of national co-financing, not for Amman,
mhm.
but instead for for the emergency response temporarily that should come on top of a state-led financed and state-financed social protection
Mhm.
system. I think we can end here. I mean, we don't have like the magic. We don't have any magic power actually, but it's just a space to discuss and to basically help people think of what is needed, and how do we progress, how do we make things just like more fit for purpose
Yeah.
when it comes to responding to people's needs. Go ahead, Cynthia, you want to say something?
Yeah, just one last thing, and I think when it comes to like civil society organizations, I think that there is a consensus on what's the gap here, like especially those that work on the ground,
Yeah.
the ones that really struggle
Yes.
with coordination and stuff like that. I think that there's definitely they're like وين الدولة دورونا عليها وين هي. So whenever they so that's my take. I think that there is definitely that, but I think that people should just again come together, band together, hold themselves accountable, hold the state accountable, because at the end of the day you want to improve the circumstances of everybody, but at the same time you need the state to take the lead as well, and building this sort of bridge,
Mhm.
and building the social contract. I mean, the social contract is already so fractured as well. Like I mean there was there was a paper that was written by Philip Proudfoot and Sami Zghib from the Policy Initiative, where they were saying like it's basically like no matter what you do, if you don't have a centralized state, you'll always have local political parties and state cap and
Right.
state capture. So this is really important. So I think it's really important to consider the fact that at the end of the day, centralization is super important, and decentralization. It's like decentralization of not just decision making, of governance, but at the same time there should
Right.
be a national framework that like so people can have more faith, more trust in the state, as you're saying, and to build a better social contract in general between civil society
Yeah.
organizations, between civil society يعني the population in general as a whole, and so everybody with the state. So this is really important to band together. I think this is the main message I think that
So
should
in
take
other
away.
words, yeah. So in other words, we need centralization of
Absolutely,
the state, but we need even development. So the scope has to be basically covering all geographic
yeah.
areas, all social
Exactly,
categories.
exactly. I mean, and
So this is
yeah, a
so
lot
this
of
is
people
what we're
advocate
saying. Yeah.
for localization, localization is super
Mm.
important, especially because of how important civil society organizations are in terms of everything. Localization and these local approaches are super important, but at the same time, to fit within more of a national framework that is inclusive and is
Yeah.
more comprehensive.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because we're not ready for it. Because localization can be, I mean, this type of decentralization, which is the localization of the interventions, is good when we are able to do financial sustainability on the local
Yeah.
level with the local
Yeah.
actors, the local
Mhm.
governments, you know. And we're still not ready
Yeah.
for this. So that's why we should be centralizing and then implementing basically everywhere. But as you said, everything should go back to a central framework, to a central strategy. And also, when it comes to implementing, we should be more comprehensive, not just inclusive and universal. I mean, social development centers cannot just be primary healthcare centers. There are other layers to social welfare that we should be addressing for sure, and we need to take that into consideration. This was a very enlightening discussion, Cynthia. I really feel like so usually Afkaris take 30 minutes, and we're like now at 50 at
You
the
and I love
50th
to talk,
minute.
Farah. We love to talk.
Exactly, exactly. And it's just a brainstorming space. I mean, Afkaris aren't like webinars, aren't there to state facts and data and just like scientific evidence. They're there to open the floor for a discussion, to open new perspectives, to get it's just food for thought. So some things we write on, some things we're not, but just this discussion can basically open the space for exchange and for like a thoughtful process, reflecting on what's happening, because we all have responsibility to think and to help the state improve, and to also improve as the human beings. We also have a responsibility to support people that are affected, and to redistribute all form of resources internally, from those that are capable to those who are currently incapable. So thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you
It
so
was a
much.
pleasure hosting you.
Always,
And
yes.
yeah, let's hope the war ends
Yeah, inshallah.
soonest. I mean, now we have a ceasefire. Let's hope the ceasefire holds at
Indeed.
least.
Yes.
Thank you, dear. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Take care. Bye.